We're just gonna give it just a few seconds just to make sure everything is fine on our end and you can hear us, and that everyone is on the same page this morning. It's 10 o'clock here in Celebration, Florida. So we know that several of you are joining us from different places in the world. I'm Shannon Hofen-Sarasoli with the Center for Self-Determination Theory.
I'm Richard Ryan, and I'm a scholar in self-determination theory.
So this is our second live video. So CSDT is testing out a few things to bring you content, such as these live videos, to kind of have you have more interactive experience with SDT scholars like Richard Ryan, who's a co-founder of SDT, and to kind of answer questions. I think that's what we're going to be doing a lot today.
Yeah, this is called Stump Richard Ryan, I think is the
This is a Stump Richard Ryan hour.
Actually, we took a poll to see what people would want to talk about during this particular event, and do you want to say anything about the poll?
Well, I was actually pleased with the turnout. We had a lot of people that responded to the poll, so we appreciate you guys giving us feedback, because it's always helpful. I know I think the thing is, we gave a few topics in SDT, and as anyone that's in the SDT world knows, there's 100 topics in SDT that we could talk about.
But there was a good spread, I thought, in terms of people's interests in. So there were several choices. Obviously, people were interested in organizational psychology and parenting and psychotherapy and many other areas, but education came out on top. And I guess I'm particularly pleased that education came out on top today, because for me, it's been something that's been on my mind a lot lately. One of the things in self-determination theory is, when we think about education, we think about schools and educational institutions being not just places where kids learn academic content, but they're contexts for their holistic development. And we think it's really important that when schools are providing an educational atmosphere, they're nurturing the whole child, not just a narrow portion of their cognitive skills. And to do that, of course, means satisfying the basic psychological needs that every child has. And there's been a lot of research on how important that is for well-being. And I think one thing that's come out a lot in SDT research is that teachers play such a huge role in this nurturing process, because they're the most proximal influence on children in the classroom. And so teachers who are supporting autonomy and supporting mastery and competence and supporting relatedness in the classroom are really helping kids develop in that holistic ways. And I just add one more thing. I guess the thing that I think is the really interesting dynamic, and why it's on my mind all the time, is SDT research has discovered that teachers need support too. If teachers' basic psychological needs aren't being satisfied, if they're being deprived of autonomy, if they're being in ways not being given the opportunities to collaborate and structure with one another, or they're given the wrong kind of resources to teach in the classroom and then mandated to transmit those anyway, these are things that interfere with teachers' needs. And so, a lot of our research has been on this dynamic of support teachers so they can support students, and then students can grow into a healthy place.
That's a really good point. And education's been on my mind recently, because my daughter just started back to school. So for parents, right now it's really important, because education, do they get a good teacher? Is it the right school?
Yeah.
Is it the
Every
right
parent has these. Yeah.
Right, and it's so at this time of year, and you've got kids, or trying to get your kids to school, getting them motivated in the morning, getting them motivated about their school, and so it's on my mind, but for a different reason.
So we have I see you have a lot of questions there.
Yes, I do. No, we do have a lot of questions, and that's we have a lot of questions. So I hope we get to everyone that submitted questions to us. And I think you're gonna have to do like a speed round, Rich, to get through all these. But
I'll do my best to be succinct, although that's not my forte.
I know. No, we will do our best. So let's just jump right into it then.
Let's go.
Okay. This question comes from Allie. I seem to remember some discussion at SDT 2019, that was our recent conference, about whether identified regulation was actually better than intrinsic motivation. Is there a consensus opinion? What is Richard's view?
Well, Allie, that's a really good question. I think the view of self-determination theory is the optimal motivation in a educational environment is to have both of those things be very strong, not only to enjoy in general the work that you're doing, but also to value it and see what it's worth, to have internalized the importance of learning. And so really the best educational environments promote both of those things. They promote the internalization of the desire to learn, but they also promote the fun and inherent interest in the activities themselves wherever they can do so. And so I wouldn't put one against the other. I will say though, there's been a lot of recent research and that shows really the importance of intrinsic motivation for achievement in a lot of different settings. You certainly would want to have that be an element in any classroom in a pretty heavy way, but identification is also important. So I don't think it's an either or.
It's not either. Okay.
And as it turns out, the conditions that support both of those kinds of motivation still come back to basic psychological needs. When there's more autonomy support, more competence support, there's better internalization and more relatedness support, and the same is true for intrinsic motivation. So they're not competing agendas either.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, is satisfying basic psychological needs to help both of those.
Yeah.
This question is from Jen. What rewards and competition are good in classrooms?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I guess, you know, SET's almost famous for saying that rewards and competition are really risky ways of motivating people. And so my first comment would be, those aren't the first things I'd be appealing to motivate children in any case. I would want to make the experience of learning rewarding. And to have something be rewarding means that it's really need satisfying. So I want to be structuring activities so that kids can feel successful at their what they're doing. I want to be doing it in a way where they have choices and flexibility in how they go about doing it, so they can feel ownership and autonomy. And I want to do it in a way that's really connected and supported. So I think, you know, to me, those are the rewards that we want to have in classroom settings. And we don't need arbitrary rewards or things that are kind of separable from the activity themselves. Rather, let's dig into the activity and make them satisfying to do. I think competition is a particularly risky thing to be doing in classrooms, because there's always one of the definitions of competition is somebody loses. And I care about those kids. I think we all care about those kids just as much as we care about the ones who would come out on top. And while people think competition is a really motivating condition, it's also a demotivating condition for a lot of the participants, sometimes even for the winners. It also competition tends to be focused around very narrow outcomes and social comparisons, and most things can have destructive influence on motivation. So there's a lot to say about this, about what makes something rewarding, and it's not to also say that all rewards are not okay in classrooms. If you're going to use rewards, use rewards in a way that is acknowledging competence and effort, not comparisons between people. So don't use them competitively, and if you're going to use them to acknowledge competence and
because I remember in school, like in one class I had, there was a leaderboard. And if you had read this many books, you were at the top of the leaderboard. And anyway, I think it just is a great example of this exact thing.
Right. I think any educator ought to ask themselves, what is this doing to the kids at the bottom?
Right.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jen, for the question. This one's from Quang. How can students apply self-determination theory to promoting their motivation themselves?
Well, Quang, I don't think there's a lot of good research on this within SDT, so I think you are actually articulating something that we probably should be moving towards more. I think when you say students doing it for themselves, I think now we have to think about the developmental range of students, because I think in the younger ages, I don't think we're going to be teaching them self-determination theory and having them provide more autonomy for themselves. I think that's something that the nurturing environment should provide to younger children. I do think by adolescence, I think we can be having some active educational forms which help kids optimize their own motivation and well-being. And there hasn't been those kinds of interventions to any large extent. I certainly haven't seen them in our literature. I know I have done workshops with adolescents, and I've mostly done them around the issue of intrinsic need satisfaction and the kind of risks when you get involved in a consumeristic, extrinsic culture. And they have taken very well, and I think the adolescents that I've interacted with seem to learn a lot. They when they learn about how advertisers try and hook them or control them, they're really interested in that. I think that helps them make better decisions later. So I think, Quang, this is an area we should do more work in, but there's not enough done at the moment.
Yeah, I always like when you provide the example, so that was a really good one.
Thanks.
Okay.
Just supporting my confidence.
We try to practice, right? This is from Purnell. SD,
No.
yeah, I think is that.
Okay.
I'm sorry if I mess up any names. SDT describes 3 basic needs for competence, autonomy, and relatedness. How do you look upon a need for meaning?
Well, the need for this question has been raised a lot, I think, over the years, and really back in the year 2000, Ed DC and I wrote an article on why these were the 3 basic needs we focused on, and why other ones like meaning were not the focus of that. And there's a couple of articles we've written on that. The main reason is because meaning is more an outcome of need-satisfying activity. So if you look at what people consider to be meaningful, it's typically the activities where they've experienced autonomy, competence, or relatedness. Now, we did an article recently, Frank Martella and I, and I'm trying to think who, Michael Seiger, who's really an expert in the meaning area. We did an article together on prediction of events that were really meaningful to people. And it turned out to be really 4 things. It was autonomy, competence, relatedness, and beneficence, doing good for other people. And I think this is an area where SDT's done a lot of work. When you do good for other people, you satisfy all your basic psychological needs, because you satisfy your autonomy, you satisfy your relatedness, and you also feel effective if you're able to help people.
Yeah.
So, but in addition, there's some kind of warm glow that comes from beneficence that also adds to meaning. So in that article, we were showing that meaning is largely accounted for by these 4 factors. So, we tend to think of meaning as an outcome rather than as a need in its own right, and that the needs are the drivers of that experience of meaning.
I grouped some of these questions, so we're going to turn towards you'll hear some kind of things around grading and high stakes testing. There's a few questions, so
Okay.
so here you go. This one's from Brittany. What other kind of structures?
Hey, I think I have.
You have a Brittany?
I have a Brittany cup right here. Brittany, you're the same Brittany?
Yeah, it's the same Brittany. Brittany's one of our colleagues here. That's funny. What other kind of structures?
She doesn't know I stole her cup.
Now she knows. Welcome to live TV.
Okay.
Oh, what other kind of structures outside of grades can teachers use or students use themselves that demonstrate growth in competence and learning?
Oh, well, I guess this is one of my hot topics
I
personally.
know. We're all waiting for it.
I've never really been a fan of grades, and there's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, grades are demotivating for most of the people who receive them. Even when you're chasing the high grade and you get it, that's still not the right kind of motivation from an SDT point of view. And there's been no empirical justification for why we have grades in schools at all. We don't see it as a good motivational device. We understand that there are gatekeeping tests that schools must do about, establishing credentials, but there are many ways of doing that without grading and comparing kids on an everyday basis. So I like the question because it's saying, what else can we do? And one of the things that's been shown in research, not just our research, but by people like Ruth Butler and others, is that there's not much information in grades. You get a grade, it tells you where you fell compared to the other students, but it doesn't tell you what you did well, what you didn't do well. So if I'm using the structure to help support competence, in SDT we say it's about being informational, going right to the specific accomplishments and tasks that students are doing and giving them information on how they can increase their efficacy at that, how they can do better than they were doing before. So it's a comparison with their own efforts, and it's also relevant to the specific things that are going to be good for them. So I think it's that interaction, that dense informational feedback that's much more effective than grades if in a classroom setting.
Right.
And so I don't know if that answers that question, but it allows me to rant on grades for a minute, because if you look across the world, it's one of the most widely used strategies in classrooms without any defense in the literature.
Yeah, and I'm going to just kind of go off a little on this. You've worked with some schools that have changed the structures around that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I worked here for a while in Rochester with a school called School Without Walls, and School Without Walls has a system of evaluation in which committees come together, students propose projects, they pull their knowledge together in the project, they demonstrate their competencies, they get feedback on that from multiple experts who serve on these committees. It's a really rich experience, and they grow from this, and it helps point them to directions they want to move in life. as opposed to the typical thing, which is we'll tell you what you're going to learn and we're going to grade you on it. So there are alternatives out there.
Okay, well, I've got some more things for you to hit on here. This question comes from Heather. How can parents foster a desire for learning when the school system is stuck on high stakes testing and grades?
Well, you know, most of us who've been parents in the United States, this is the problem we deal with every day, but it's not just in the U.S. High stakes tests are really, sadly, a movement around the world which is holding schools and students accountable to performance on a pretty narrow band of cognitive skills measured by high stakes tests. This is true in China, it's true in the U.S., it's true in some European countries. And it's not that SDT is against testing, it's against high stakes testing, putting rewards and punishments behind outcomes of test scores, which we see as mostly a destructive process and driving bad things in the classroom. So what was the question?
So the question is, how can parents?
How can parents? So there are some noxious influences on students' motivation in schools that come from a lot of these evaluative strategies. And so how can a parent buffer that? I think it's, again, by being supportive of students. It's not being critical and judgmental of them, but trying to be understanding of what's happened for them when they're struggling in school, to try and get their perspective on how they're struggling and then help them with those struggles. Also, I think parents can advocate with teachers. If they're seeing concerns that are coming up in the classroom, I think they should go to the teacher and they should talk to the teacher about that. It's another way that they can do it. And then I'm just going to say one third thing that just pops into mind now, and this really comes out of work that has been done at Ben Gurion by Avi Asor and others on what they call intrinsic value demonstration. If I want my child to really understand the value of learning and reading and doing those things, I need to model that, read with my children, have them witness that I'm also reading, have them see that I care about information that's out in the world. In other words, when parents show that they value learning and reading and those kinds of things, then that also is a way in which kids are more likely to internalize them. So the combination of autonomy, support, and intrinsic value demonstration, I think, is a really good strategy for parenting. And you know, those of you who are on top of the SDT literature, you know, you might go look at this concept of intrinsic value demonstration from the Ben Gurion group.
That's a great point.
Love your children no matter how they do in school. That's the main thing.
I think that's, no, I'm glad you said that.
I mean that in the deep way. The main thing is love your children.
Yeah.
Unconditional positive regard is huge, and that's what every child needs more than any specific intervention of that sort.
Oh, I like how you answered Heather's question. Yeah, this comes from Lynn. Can an SDT perspective on the recent college entrance scandal in the U.S.? So, I know we have people outside of the U.S. that might not know a little about this, so you might want to.
Wow, that's really interesting. Question. There has been a scandal in the U.S. recently, and if this is the scandal that's being referred to, it's the one where celebrities have bribed college officials of various sorts to get them into colleges, right? So sometimes it's been sport coaches in particular, because that's a way they have access to positions in colleges. So there's been a scandal. And it has to do with competitiveness that I think a lot of parents feel. I think some people feel like, if I don't get my child into this particular university, they're not going to have a future. There's this kind of, I think, wrongly placed care for your children by trying to force them into these prestigious institutions that they're not even maybe well matched to that child. You know, again, when I go back to thinking about how I want my child to go to colleges, I want them to participate in the choice, in the selection. I want them to find a place that really matches with who they are. And these are parents who are trying to force their kids into places where obviously they weren't otherwise qualified to be. Okay, that says something about the parents' aspirations.
Their aspirations, the parents' own aspirations.
But it also shows something about our educational system and the comparative nature of it, and the focus on hierarchies of prestige, which I think is often really misplaced. And I think parents who are just thinking, my kid won't be able to make it in life unless they get into an Ivy League school, just don't really understand life that well.
Right.
But I do understand that insecurities drive these kinds of things. Everybody wants the best for their children that they can do, and that's probably what's really behind the scandal. I feel sorry for everyone involved in that. I mean, the parent. When I see the parents interviewed, you see that it's misplaced, but they thought they were doing the best, and then of course they were doing something unethical.
Right.
And they're displacing some other person who deservedly should be there. And that's, to me, the scandal part of it.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thanks, Lynn, for that question. Michael has a great.
Cheating.
No cheating. Right. Speaking of cheating and grades and everything. Michael wants to know, how do we change the social policies like high stakes testing that are influencing education?
So this got me connected.
Yeah,
The question
it is.
is these pressures in a lot of countries here on high stakes testing, and I wish there was an easy answer to this question. I've been involved with groups that have been lobbying against high stakes testing for a long, long time. There has been progress made in the U.S. on this. If in most states where there are high stakes tests, you are legally allowed to opt your kid out of those tests. And the thing I would advocate for is
people don't know that.
I know they don't know that because education departments often want to obscure this parental right. Parents do not have, in most states, they do not have to have their child participate in those tests. And I think that's one way to send a message. These are not good for us.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons that we've been against high-stakes testing and self-determination theory is it drives bad classroom practices. Because of the reward and punishments to get scores on an outcome, it means it rewards any route to that outcome.
Mm-hmm.
That's the motivational outcome of these strategies. So it's a bad policy, and what it does is it leads teachers, not at their own fault, to teach to the test, to focus only on the kids who can really make the grade. It drives some schools to eliminate kids from their schools because they don't want them taking the test. There's all kinds of gaming that goes on in these kinds of systems, none of which contributes to really quality education. So I do think we all have to fight this in all countries, and we can look to better models, look to something like Finland as a model for how we might organize our system with both accountability, but without this kind of narrow reward and punishment approach.
Good answer. I'm going to switch kind of a little bit and talk more a little broadly about educational environments. This question comes from Jeffrey. Are there any educational models like Montessori that are most closely related to SDT?
Well, it's neat that he mentions Montessori. That's Jeffrey, you said?
Yeah.
Montessori certainly among scholars is somebody who really appreciated intrinsic motivation. She saw the spontaneous nature of children's desire to learn, and also understood that that takes place best in an environment that's also structured to support that learning. Mm-hmm. And of course, a lot of recent research in SDT is really showing it's this combination of high autonomy support and high structure that really provides the best and most engaging educational environments. And Montessori schools, that's kind of their ideal. Now, I'll say Montessori schools vary a lot, even within Montessori schools. So any particular school might be doing more or less things that are consistent with SDT's autonomy support and structure movements. But the philosophy of Montessori and Pestalozzi before her, it really, I think it has some congruence with SDT. And there's been a lot of other school experiments, small school experiments that I think are consistent with SDT. You and I both read an article recently on the Forest School. We did. Which is a school that really tries to build an education also around contact and engagement with nature, and it's based around intrinsic motivation and autonomy supported principles. So it's a really good one to write. I think you can find it on our website.
Our Farntintis, that's his, he was in that research.
So I think it's on our website someplace.
It is.
And then finally, I think there are national models that are better than others. And of course, one of the SDT, because we have a critical basis for evaluating things, we say we're looking directly at who does the best at satisfying psychological needs of children. Some countries are doing better at that than others. And again, I'm going to point to Finland and some other countries that have really thought about child development at the core of their educational strategies, as opposed to some other countries that are just thinking out kind of top down of these are the things we're going to make kids learn without any developmental perspective on how that actually unfolds and occurs. So there are models out there that are consistent with SDT. I'd love to see even more experimental schools built around these principles. I think we will.
We're starting to, Rich. Heart of Character is another school that has based their whole curriculum around SDT and satisfying, fostering basic psychological needs.
And there was a presentation on that at the SDT conference.
Right.
So I think there are idealized models out there that fit with SDT, and I hope we can be researching them even more.
Right. We should check in. Okay, good. We have some more time.
We were
so good.
I think 45 minutes, and we're at 25 now. So
yeah.
Okay. Okay, we have a timer.
We have a timer.
And an audience.
We have a producer audience of one. This question comes from Maria. Are homeschools good for kids?
Well, first of all, the homeschooling movement is a big movement in some places. I know in the United States is where I'm most familiar with it. There's a lot of people who are doing homeschooling, and part of it is because they sense that schools aren't meeting the needs of their children. So a lot of parents who do homeschooling, it's out of the sensibility or perception that they're going to be able to better meet their kids' needs. When they educate their kids at home in that way, I think that is a good thing. Let's remember that homeschooling is a really varied thing, and parents are going to have different agendas in their homeschooling. Some people are doing it because they want a restrictive religious environment. Some others are doing it because they want a more progressive educational environment. I can't give any summary question on that. I think, though, SDT would tell you all the moderators of when homeschooling is working and when it's not working.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important thing. My own personal contact with homeschooling has been a pretty positive thing. In my own city, there's a group of homeschoolers who are our neighbors, and we would see all the time they're gathering, and the resources. There was lots of opportunities for flexible use of resources because there are a lot of expert parents within the community, and they would teach kids and mentor kids. They do more hands-on. They would do more active learning. Homeschooling affords that kind of flexible, developmentally focused learning if it's in good hands. But I think a lot of parents need help and guidance in how to do that.
Right.
Teaching is a profession,
right?
And it takes a lot of skills, and so I think if you're going to homeschool, get resources on your side and get contact with people who really can help you structure that education. Again, high structure, high autonomy support is important in education, and I think most parents would need some resources to really pull that off well.
Right. This actually leads into our next question from Tracy. How do flexible learning environments foster student autonomy, influencing motivation in the classroom? How can teachers better support their students in this way? So flexible learning environments fostering student autonomy and motivation.
Well, I'm not quite sure what the question means, but there is a term out there of flexible learning environments that I've seen, and it really describes schools where they're, instead of just a kind of contained classroom space with one teacher, and the kids are in that classroom all the time, there's flexibility in terms of the use of space. They carve up the school so that there are breakout rooms and rooms where people can go to and do small groups. There's also flexibility in terms of scheduling, so instead of the kind of constant same scheduling things, there's more flexibility for teachers to decide, we're going to do a long class on this today, or we're going to do a short little segment over here. And then there's flexibility in terms of how personnel rotates. So, when I think about that construct, I think it's flexibility in space, flexibility in personnel who are doing the teaching, and flexibility in the scheduling.
Right.
Well, what do we think about that from SDT? That's giving teachers some support for autonomy. That's allowing them, and it's also giving them support for working collaboratively. So I think the two big advantages of this are it's a support for teachers to design educational environments using their own creativity and innovation, and also reach the special needs of kids. So, when you have some kids who really need some extra tutoring in something, rather than doing that to the whole class, which is not optimally challenging to the whole class, you can have a breakout room where you go to the kids who might need a little more on that subject matter, and then you can be doing something else with the others and divide up personnel. So there's a lot of nice things in that movement, if that's what's being referred to here. So I'm all for it.
Great. I'm glad you answered that question because I wasn't sure what flexible learning environments was.
I'm not sure that's
okay,
but there is a term out there that refers to that. Yeah, so.
And if that's not the right term, I was going to answer.
Then we apologize.
This question comes from Sarah. What work is currently happening with regard to educating young adults about the concepts of SDT? We teach students how to care for their bodies. What benefits might we see from direct instruction regarding psychological health and well-being?
This is really like the earlier question I asked, is what could we provide through SDT that would help people kind of self-direct more healthy development. And so I just go back to, I think in the early ages, it's our responsibility as adults to provide that nurturing environment, but we should be doing more active programs to disseminate information from SDT to developing people, especially young adults. Here, I think, in in a stage of identity formation. The whole idea
yeah.
of being flexible in terms of trying out identities, not getting stuck on things, all that pressure that comes out in that age range of emerging adulthood. I think that's a place where such interventions would be great. So, who asked that question?
Came from Sarah.
Sarah, please design some interventions of this sort so we can test them. Because I think it's a great idea.
It is a great idea.
As the earlier question also suggested, and I just haven't seen a lot of work where we've been bringing it to the students themselves, except in colleges. Now, there's been a lot of work in colleges on this.
Yeah.
So there's been interventions, for instance, Ken Sheldon and his group at University of Missouri did some things where they helped students set intrinsic goals for the semester.
Yeah.
They help students evaluate the autonomy or controlled nature of their motives so that they can be reflective about them. There are mindfulness interventions. So by the time you get to the adult range, SDT does have these things. It's just that we haven't done much of the earlier developmental levels, to my knowledge. And again, write us if you've done some work on that and I'm not aware of it. I think please write and let us know.
Yeah, I like that example. So, this is from Hader. This question is, I'm interested to see SDT practicing with migration students hosted in countries. I am from the Mideast and reside in Europe, and one of the biggest obstacles in learning a new language, new culture, to reach the highest level of integration within a new society and culture. So what is Professor Richard Ryan's SDT viewpoint on this?
Well, this has been a real active area of research within SDT recently, and there's a lot of research on learning a second language or learning a language that's not your native language, and this is really important for sojourners and immigrants of various sorts, and I think that's the populations he's referring to. So, first of all, I think what the research shows is that language learning, because of its difficulty, really does require some intrinsically motivating structuring. So, for instance, Quint Baldwin and his colleagues in Japan have been doing some work on the Japanese government initiative to have more intrinsic motivation in English learning classes in Japan so that they can promote that. And some studies have shown some good success of that approach. Yeah. So that's second language learning. I think you say Hader's question is really about immigrants and their integration into cultures. And some of the other SDT research that's been out there shows that your reasons for being in that other culture will probably be predictive of how autonomous you feel about learning that second language. So some people are going to another culture because they're really trying to get away from bad circumstances where they are, but they really still want to stay insular to their own culture within a new culture that they go. And those people are less autonomously motivated to learn the second language and less prone to do so. But there are social costs of that because you're more isolated within the other country. But also people don't want to just give up their own culture. They do want to retain that. So I think this issue is a really important issue. But it's about providing, again, needs supportive circumstances for people to learn language. And then also, I think in cultures it's about promoting the acceptance and inclusion of people who have come to join us. Here in the United States, and I'm not going to get into politics now, but we could use more of an atmosphere of acceptance and support for people who do need to immigrate to our country because of bad conditions elsewhere, and provide the intrinsically motivating language learning atmosphere so they can integrate into our culture. Language is important in cultural integration, so I hope this continues to be a real active area of research.
Well, I'm just going to do a plug for CSDT, is that we are currently developing, taking all the research, because this is like a new thing in SDT. A lot of new research, we saw it at the last conference. Yeah. So we're going to have a whole publication page dedicated to language learning. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And maybe we'll have a topic page, but we are currently curating a whole page for research on this issue.
Great.
So,
this
nice
question.
Yeah. This question comes, I have a few more questions. Let me see. Okay. Do we have time? Maybe two more questions? Okay. This question comes from Lewis. Can you give us a brief overview of the kind of research that has been done examining neurological basis for SDT processes in education?
Well, this is another, I think, very active area of research within SDT, and I think there's been a few leaders in this area. Woogle Lee from South Korea. He's been a real champion in this area, and so is John Marshall Reeve, who's one of his colleagues, and Stefano Di Domenico from Toronto and ACU. He's been involved in this. There's been a number of people, Ko Murayama, others, have been doing research that really, I think, has supported SDT's viewpoint on the importance of autonomous motivation. One of the things we've seen in the work from Lee and Reeve, and really others as well, is that you can see that when things are intrinsically motivating, we've always said when they're internally rewarding, well, that turns out to be true. The bilateral striatum, the striatum lights up when you're doing things that are intrinsically motivated.
For people who may not know, can you just give a little brief background for what this means? Like,
I'm trying.
Okay, so
I'm getting there.
Okay, you're making
Well, the bilateral striatum is an area of the brain that sometimes people call it the reward center of the brain. That's not quite accurate because there's really a reward system in the brain, but it is an area you'd expect to be activated when something is rewarding. And when you give external rewards to people, that area of the brain becomes activated. But it's also true when they do something that's just interesting itself. And then in another part of this is when you do something that's intrinsically motivated, you see more activation in the areas where we would detect engagement, like in the lateral prefrontal cortical areas of the brain, where you can see that active work and effort being done. So, there's been evidence that supports our view that these forms of motivation are kind of self-driving in a way, that we find there's inherent reinforcement or inherent rewards in certain kinds of activities if they're well structured. And so I think the neurological work has supported that. And then more recently, Lee's been doing some work, not just Lee, but also Stefano Di Domenico and others on what need satisfaction looks like in neuropsychology, and I think this is an exciting new area. And I guess for our purposes here, I refer to Lee, Woogle Lee's work and John Marshall Reeve's work in this area because they've written some review articles on just this topic recently. And there's one that I think is about to come out in a special issue for motivation and emotion on basic psychological needs. So write to Lee and Reeve, and maybe they'll send you their pre-print.
Yeah, right. And we do try to feature things that are, as soon as they come across our desk, we feature them in our Friday feature.
I think that one's just not quite out yet. So, but they also wrote a review of this in the journal Personality, also recently, 2018, 2019, a special issue on SDT as a general theory of personality. They had an article in there on the neuropsychology of SDT.
Yeah, and can you talk to us a little bit about the education piece? Because I know some of the work is actually looking at certain learning processes.
Well, this is what we're doing in our labs in Sydney right now. So in our Sydney labs, Stefano Di Domenico and I are running some experiments, and our other colleagues there are running some experiments on math problems, actually. And we're having people under motivation conditions where it's telling the importance of the task that we're doing. It's an identification kind of motivation, and other ones we're having them more ego involved. Like we're measuring their intelligence and trying to look at how does that affect the way in which they engage that information, their performance on those tasks, and then we're doing that with techniques that allow us to image what's going on in the frontal cortex. So we use the Effner's strategy for that. So it's infrared lights through the prefrontal cortex, so we can see what's being activated. And we're not done with that experiment, but this is the kind of work where we're trying to connect the different motivational processes we study behaviorally and phenomenologically in SDT with neuropsychological processes. And I just go to say, I think it's part of the philosophy of science, of self-determination theory, to move toward consilience, that we want all of our knowledge to be represented and analyzed on every level of analysis, from social all the way down to molecular biology. So it's not a brave new world, it's the right kind of idea for science, which is all of our knowledge should be integrated, and there's nothing antithetical about moving towards both the mechanisms and the social processes that determine what we do.
I just love this it's not even new anymore. It's but I love the exploration of all of this in SDT.
There's been some great research in this area.
So actually, if there's any kind of new research, do send a message to CSDT, because we love seeing that come across our desk. It's one way that you can kind of give us feedback on.
People may not know this, but Shannon, being the director of his Center for Self-Determination Theory, is always trying to post new work. And if you have new work, or you're an SDT scholar who's done a couple or more articles in SDT, get on our faculty page, get your research posted within the website, because that allows people to access it. So I'm just just backing up.
No, I love any plug for CSDT, and we're getting a cue. So let's make this the last question. This is a good question. This one's from Claudia. Okay, so we have a few minutes. So this is: are routines good for kids, or is it good to have more flexible, unstructured time?
Oh, I think this is a great question. I think in many societies today, certainly in my own society here in the U.S. and what I see in Australia and what I see in other places is kids are too structured. There's not enough unstructured time for kids. And one of the things that's been seen over and over again in SDT research is play is one of the most important things for neuropsychological development, for emotional development, for social development, and we don't give kids enough time for play. And when we do have them play in structured settings, adults are organizing it, and that's depriving them of the opportunity to learn how to connect, how to cooperate, how to solve disputes, all the things that come about when children play. And I think this is that fetishism for achievement and the insecurity of parents who are structuring everything in kids' lives, so there's no room for them to be children. And even aside from the benefits of play and unstructured time with children, which has to do with development, let's also remember that childhood is part of life. I mean, life is about living well, and playing is part of a child living well, and we need to provide space for that, independent of the good effects it has, and it has huge good effects. But we also just need to think, what promotes a child's well-being? Well, some of that is having some unstructured time to play, to manipulate the world around them, to fantasize, to do the things that children will do, and we need more space for that. There's too much structured activity, adult structured activity in kids' lives. There should be some, and it's always good to have some, but I just think it's overdone these days. Kind of brings us back to the kind of where I was saying at the beginning is SDT's approach is about holistic child development. Let's help the child not just develop intellectually, but let's help them develop also emotionally and socially, and also be happy and have a good life. And those are all important goals. So more play.
Oh, I like ending on that question. So, I kind of want to actually end on that and talk just a little bit more about CSDT since we have minutes left.
3 minutes? 3 minutes.
So I just want to kind of say, CSDT, we've started this nonprofit to kind of disseminate the research, the applications, and everything that's going on in the world of SDT. And there's a lot.
This activity is one of those things. I think we're trying to find and experiment with ways to get information out to people. So our little chats are one of those things, but there are many more initiatives.
There are. But your feedback on all of these initiatives that we're doing, or new ideas or things that you would like to see, do message us, email us, go to our website, hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, and let us know how we're, what we're doing well and what you'd like to see more of.
And I do know that we polled people about what to do on this one. We'll be doing that polling again, but what we saw was that there was a spread of interest in a lot of topics. So depending on your feedback, we may do more of these live chats, I think, in the future. Well, we'll see. We'll talk about it after today. But I think a lot of that's going to depend on, do you find this useful, or was there something else you'd like to see? So write us, let us know.
Well, I had a lot of fun today, as we always have fun having these chats, so we hope you enjoyed watching, and we really appreciate you tuning in. We appreciate Adriana Torres for her assistance today. And also Immersive, who is a partner of ours at CSDT, for always housing CSDT offices within their space, and for everything that they do to support us. So we really appreciate that. And so thank you, Richard Ryan, for asking. There were a lot of questions, and I know there were probably some more maybe came in, so send them our way and we'll try to get to those.